What was your dad like when you were a child? Chapter 5. What was he like? Well, understand, I was born in 1940. And from 40 to 45, we were at war. And my father worked in the Coliseum spraying tanks and jeeps for the war effort from, I would say, 5:30 in the morning till 6 at 5:30, 6 at night when we had dinner. So when did I see my father as a kid? Well, I saw him at dinner, and there was four of us: my mother, my father, and me and my brother. And we sat around the table, we ate and talked. What did we talk about? I don't know. I tell you the truth, it couldn't be too bad because we did it every night. But my father was, I would depict him as the hardest worker that I knew. He would basically, no matter what the weather was, whether he was sick or not, he'd go to work. And hopefully he passed that on to his sons. And guess what? I feel I have a pretty damn good work ethic. And I hope my kids learn from me as I learned from him. But again, my father worked a lot. So again, what did I see of him when I was a child? Not much. But later on, as I got older, he would take us fishing on a Saturday. Every Saturday we go to City Island and we go fishing off the docks, most of the time in Fordham Street. And a couple of times if he had a few bucks, he would spring and rent a rowboat. And we go on a rowboat. And those were magical times, just the three of us. My brother, my father, and we talked, we laughed every Saturday. I used to go dig the worms for him in the sand, and that was our bait. But I remember 5 days a week, my father had dinner. But on the weekends, of course, we had to go to my grandmother's, which was right down the block, and we had dinner. And anybody that knows an Italian family dinner, you know what I'm talking about. At least 30 people, 30 Italians, and one Irishman. The woman would gather and prepare the meal with my grandmother. And she'd sit there as the matriarch, making homemade macaroni, and they would talk, and it was all her daughters, and there were six of them. And the men sat in the parlor talking whatever, and God forbid you would interrupt them because children in those days were seen but not heard. And the cousins, we would go out and play, no supervision, because we didn't need it. Played, had fun, and then we have the 4 hour dinner. And we sat around the table eating and talking and laughing and sometimes even crying, but it was every Saturday the same thing. So it was a lot of love and a lot of warmth and sometimes posturing. But there, after the meal, the 4 hour meal, my mother says, time to go home. So she would take me and my brother home. And what would my father do? He would sit around with some of the uncles and a couple of the aunts, and they play cards. Now, you say, oh, they play cards. Guess what? Around the clock. And I would have to go about noon on Sunday, go get your father to come home for lunch. What? Okay. So I go there. Every time the same thing. When I left them, all in suits, very sharp. When I came back to pick them up, my father up at noon the next day, smoke from cigars, the shirts are open, the ties are loosened, and I said, Dad, it's time to come home. And he'd say, one more hand. It's the same thing. After play it all night, one more hand. And everybody lost. Yeah, I lost a few dollars. I lost it. Guess what? My father never lost, even though he said he lost. He would fill his jar with his winnings. And that's what supported him. My mother would get a closed envelope. She would give him his $10, his $10 allowance. And that was to pay for everything that he had. Cigarettes, train, whatever he had to pay for came out of that $10 and whatever he won in the jar. So that's what it was. And my mother on that Sunday, when he came home, he would lay down, take a nap, and we go to the movies. Every Sunday, go to the movies. And we come home. On the way home, we'd stop for my triplets, pizza, and have a pizza. That was it. And that's what I remember. And I remember with such warmth, and I remember how hard my father worked, and I remember sometimes he'd take us to Coney Island in Brooklyn. You had to take 2 trains. And he'd drop us off at Steeplechase Park. And he paid a fee that would cover our rides. And he'd go off. And after we finished doing all the rides, we'd go look for my father. And we normally found him on the boardwalk watching a show, normally with girls in it. Girly shows. I used to get nervous because I thought they were looking at my father. But he did that. Every now and then he'd take us there, and always dressed up to go to Coney Island. So anyway, that's basically what my father was like and what he passed on. Passed on a lot of that work ethic, love, and warmth. So that's chapter 5.